For thousands of years of church history, there have been moments when the greatest battles did not come from outside forces, but emerged from within those who call upon the same name of God. Today, millions of people are asking one question: what is truly happening between the Vatican and traditional Catholics? Why has an ordination ceremony created such a major crisis? Because behind that ceremony lies not simply a decision made by a group of people. It touches one of the most sensitive issues within the Church: leadership, tradition, obedience, and the question of who is truly protecting the sacred things that have been passed down through generations. One side believes they are standing up to defend what is slowly being forgotten. The other warns that the unity of the Church is being placed before a serious test, and when both sides believe they are fighting for what is right, a frightening question emerges. What happens when people who profess the same faith no longer look in the same direction? This is not merely a story about a ceremony. This is the story of a confrontation that has lasted for decades, and the questions that millions of believers are still searching for answers to. But what is causing millions of people to stop and ask questions is not simply because of a ceremony that took place. It is because this situation is touching one of the most sensitive issues in the life of faith. What happens when people who all profess Jesus Christ believe they are called to defend different things? For many years, a quiet tension has existed within the Catholic Church. One side believes that sacred tradition needs to be protected from the changes of the modern age. The other side fears that the obedience and unity of the Church are being placed before a serious challenge. And then, an event in Aachen, Switzerland, made everything no longer just a private debate. A decision was made, a line was crossed, and the Catholic world began asking, is this simply a disagreement within the Church? Or is it revealing a deeper struggle over faith, authority, and loyalty? Because sometimes the greatest battles do not happen between those who believe in God and those who reject Him. They happen between those who all believe they are standing on His side. But the biggest question still remains: who exactly is the Society of St. Pius X, and why has a traditional Catholic community become a name that has drawn such close attention from the Vatican? Because this is not a group that appeared overnight. This is a movement that has existed for more than 50 years. A movement that has always held a unique position and sparked significant debate within the Catholic Church. Those who support the Society of St. Pius X believe they are protecting a treasure of faith that is at risk of being lost. They see a world that is changing too quickly. They fear that things once considered sacred, the traditions passed down through generations, are gradually losing their place. For them, this is not merely a matter of rituals. It is a matter of identity, of loyalty, and of the question: what must we preserve when the world around us is changing? But that same strong conviction has also made them the center of intense debates, because while they say they are defending tradition, others raise a completely different question. Can the defense of what is sacred eventually lead someone to separate themselves from the unity of the Church? And that is the very paradox at the heart of this story. One side sees faithfulness to the past. The other sees the risk of breaking the unity of the present. One side fears that tradition is being lost. The other fears that obedience is being disregarded. And when these two concerns collide, a debate that has lasted for decades begins to grow more intense than ever. Because the Society of St. Pius X is not only raising questions about a ritual, they are touching on a much deeper question: what matters more in the life of faith? Preserving exactly what has been handed down, or walking in unity with the Church as it exists today? And it is this very question that has brought this story to the moment the entire Catholic world is watching today. But it is here that the story becomes more intense than ever, because what one side calls faithfulness to the faith is what the other side sees as a step beyond the boundaries. The Society of St. Pius X says they are defending what has been handed down. The Vatican says there are boundaries that cannot be crossed. One side sees a battle to preserve what is being lost. The other sees a challenge to the unity of the Church. One side asks, if we do not defend tradition today, who will defend it tomorrow? The other asks, if unity is broken, what remains of one united Church? Two sides, two perspectives, two completely different answers. And what is most remarkable, both say they are defending the Church. Both say they are defending the faith. Both believe they are standing on the side of truth. But when two sides both claim they are protecting what is sacred, a question begins to emerge: who is truly defending what God desires, and who may be unintentionally creating an even deeper division? This is no longer just a story about a ceremony. It is no longer just a story about a group of priests. This is a confrontation between tradition and authority, between the memory of the past and the direction of the present, and between a question the Church has faced for centuries: when people believe they are defending God, how can they know for certain that they are walking on the path He truly wants? But there is something even more thought-provoking than this confrontation, and it is this: what happens when both sides believe they are standing on God's side? Because this is not the first time in history that people who share the same faith have found themselves on opposite sides. One side says, we are losing the sacred things that have been handed down to us. The other says, we cannot allow unity to be broken. And the most frightening thing is not that people have different questions. The frightening thing is when a person believes they are defending God. They can begin to believe that everyone on the opposing side is fighting against God. That is the moment when a debate about faith can turn into a battle between people. And this is the question every believer must ask themselves. If God were to look down upon all these debates, what would he see? Would he only see the arguments that are right and the ones that are wrong? Or would he also see the hearts behind the words we speak? Because in the Bible, there were people who were deeply knowledgeable about the law. There were people who were extremely passionate about defending their faith. There were people who believed they were doing what was right before God. But then they discovered they had become so focused on defending the things of God that they forgot to allow God to transform them. And that is what makes the story between the Vatican and the Society of St. Pius X bigger than the issue itself. Because the true question is not only directed at them, it is directed at all of us. When we fight for what we believe is right, are we fighting with the love of God, or are we simply fighting to prove that we are right? And perhaps this is exactly what the Bible wants us to see. Because throughout history, humanity's greatest problem has never simply been a lack of knowledge. It has been the heart. There are times when people can know a great deal about God, yet forget how to become more like Him. We see this many times throughout Scripture. The Pharisees were deeply knowledgeable about the law. They knew the Scriptures. They knew what was considered right. They strongly defended religious principles, but Jesus repeatedly warned them. A person can preserve the outward appearance of righteousness, yet lose the most important thing within, and that is the heart. And this is the first lesson every believer must remember. God's truth can never be separated from humility. A person can be completely certain that they are right, but if that certainty turns into pride, it can cause them to stop listening to the voice of God. James 4:6 says, God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. The frightening thing is not that we have strong convictions. The frightening thing is when we begin to think, because I stand on God's side, I no longer need to examine my own heart. The second lesson. God's truth must always walk together with love. Jesus never called people to ignore the truth, but he also never taught people to use the truth as a weapon to hurt others. In John 13:35, Jesus said, By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. What identifies a follower of Christ is not only what they say, it is also how they treat those who disagree with them, because it is easy to love those who think the same way we do. But God sees what happens when we encounter people with different perspectives. Do we still have patience? Do we still have compassion? Do we still remember that the person standing before us is also created in the image of God? And the final lesson. Do not allow the external battles to make you lose the internal battle. There are debates that people spend their entire lives trying to win, yet they forget what God is trying to change within them. A person can win an argument but lose their humility. They can defend a position but lose their peace. They can speak a great deal about God, yet become distant from the heart of God. Therefore, when we look at any debate within the church, we should not only ask, who is right? We must also ask, who am I becoming as I defend what I believe? Because in the end, God does not only see what we are fighting for, He sees how we fight, and that may be the true test of faith. After everything that has happened, there is one thing we cannot deny. The story between the Vatican and the Society of St. Pius X is not merely a story about a ceremony. It is a story about the great questions the Church has faced for generations. How important is tradition? How important is unity? And how can people defend what they believe is right without losing what God is seeking in their hearts? Perhaps today you see this event in a different way. Perhaps you agree with one side. Perhaps you still have questions that remain unanswered. But there is one thing all believers can agree on. We need God's wisdom more than we need human certainty. Because in every debate about faith, what ultimately matters is not only where we stand, but who we are becoming before Him. If this video has helped you look deeper into faith, church history, and the lessons hidden within Scripture, subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring important stories of faith together, and share your thoughts. In your opinion, what is the greatest challenge when believers have different perspectives about faith? May God bless you with peace, wisdom, and a heart that always seeks Him.